From Social Prosperity Partners, this is Community Catalysts. Welcome to Community Catalysts, the podcast that explores the qualities of community leadership and the many paths and forms it can take. This is your place to hear how local leaders are building trust, bringing people together, and making government work better, one community at a time. Our guests share the moments that shaped them, the challenges they faced, the lessons they had to earn, and the wisdom they carry forward. I'm your host, Matt Lehrman. Thanks for listening, and be sure to follow or subscribe so you're always a part of the conversation. Today's episode is part of a monthly series sponsored by RELI, the Regional Elected Leaders Initiative at the Schar School of Policy and Government at George Mason University. RELI supports and connects regional leaders across Northern Virginia, equipping them to tackle complex challenges through collaboration and innovation. By sponsoring this episode, RELI makes those insights available to local leaders everywhere, and we are all truly grateful for that generosity. Today, we turn our focus to Arlington, Virginia, part of the vibrant and complex Washington, D.C. metro region. With a governance structure distinct from most other localities and a rich history of civic engagement, Arlington has long been a place where local decisions intersect with regional, state, and even national priorities. John Milliken has been a part of that story for more than half a century. A former member of the Arlington County Board, Virginia's Secretary of Transportation, and longtime chairman of the Virginia Port Authority, he continues to shape civic dialogue as a senior fellow in residence at George Mason University. His leadership spans local, regional, and state government, and along the way, he's helped shape many of the systems and institutions that support his community's growth and resilience. With a career rooted in public service and shaped by decades of collaboration across local, regional, and state government, I'm eager to ask him about the moments that tested him most, what he took away from those experiences, and what others in leadership might take from them too. John Milliken, welcome to Community Catalysts.
Thank you. I look forward to our conversation.
John, you've served at nearly every level of government, right? Local, regional, state, over the span of decades. Take us back to the beginning. What first drew you into public service? And was there something specific you had hoped to accomplish, or some belief or some moment? What got you going in this direction?
Well, actually, like a lot of local elected officials, I got started first in local community politics, trying to elect people that I thought would do a good job and whose beliefs were similar to mine, trying to elect other people to office. So I grew up in Northern Virginia, although the part of Northern Virginia where I spent my early years was rural Northern Virginia. But we moved to Arlington when I was a sophomore in high school. So I've been in this community since those formative years, despite having gone away to college and law school and et cetera. I've always been rooted in Arlington. So I started with community activities, caring about the things that my local neighborhood friends and neighbors cared about.
Does that mean that you were involved in local affairs before you even decided to run for office?
I think I always had in the back of my head that I would want to run for office. And although I was active politically and community work, my first real activity came when a person in Arlington on the county board was elected to Congress, and he asked me to come up and run his congressional office.
That's Congressman Joe Fisher, is that right?
His name was Joe Fisher, a really remarkable human being, elected to office in his early 60s, who was a PhD economist from Harvard and had an established professional credential quite apart from politics. So he came into Congress as an experienced public figure.
I'm curious to ask you, you told me as we were preparing for today that he was a really important early mentor for you. And I'm really curious to ask, what was it that you learned from him? Was it about policy, or was it about character and values in public office? What?
Just one word about Joe Fisher, kind of as a preface to that. Besides being a PhD natural resource economist who had spent time in Alaska and as the chief of staff of the Council of Economic Advisors during the Eisenhower administration, he was the international lay leader called the moderator of the Worldwide Unitarian Universalist Church. So he was a true Renaissance figure. And what he taught me was, first, public service is a positive thing, and it needs to be thought of that way. And public servants should be thought of in as good people trying to do affirmative things for their community. And second thing he taught me was be joyous about it. Smile, be positive in your approach. Too many politicians have a negative attitude toward government and toward their other politicians. That was not Joe Fisher, and that was certainly not what he taught me. So, right from the outset, I had the opportunity to sit beside and, in a sense, at the feet of a really stellar, positive public figure.
I want to fast forward a little bit. Before we hit the record button and started having our conversation here, I had shared that I used to live in Arlington. And your house, you said your house of 42 years is on the hill overlooking the apartment building that my wife and I used to live in, where we actually met. So I lived in Arlington from 1984 to 1988. And when I come back now, I can hardly recognize the area, how much it's changed. You, of course, have had a front row seat to all of that transformation, and not just watching it happen, but shaping it. So when you look back at Arlington's growth over the years, do you see it more as the result of intentional, forward-thinking policy, or do you see it as the result of just populations coming in and local government just had to do its best to keep pace with the force of what was going through?
In Arlington, at least, and I'll speak only for Arlington, just before I was elected to the county board in 1980, just before I assumed office, the board that preceded me, which included Joe Fisher, laid out the lines or the locations for the new rapid rail transit system called Metro that serves the Washington area. Those decisions, where those rail lines were going to go, helped shape everything that has followed. The 10 years that I spent on the county board was taking those lines as a given. How do you shape and make sure that your desires are carried out? How do you shape the development around those metro lines? And the choice that Arlington faced was, do you want denser development around the metro lines, allowing then the single family home areas to remain relatively untouched and protected? Or do you want to allow development to occur where the marketplace says it can? And Arlington chose, through a series of elections, the former. The planned transit-oriented development became the watchword later, much later, a decade later. Transit-oriented development was what the county chose.
What's the takeaway from that experience? Because not every community has the impetus of a federally funded metro system coming through to organize around. Are there lessons that can be learned from that in other communities about the imperative to take a proactive stance to that kind of planning and how they can do it on their own?
Yes, every community has things that are attractors that make some part of the community a more likely place for people to want to live and raise a family and whatever than other parts of the community. And so you try to do everything you can to support and buttress those areas and plan your development around those areas in the community and use the others for whatever purpose they are best used for. In the case of Arlington, because of our general location, single family homes sprouted up all over the place, and later even uh, denser development, though not to the density levels found in the metro rail corridors.
Let's move forward in time a little bit. You became Virginia's Secretary of Transportation at a time when the position was being redefined under a new statute. And the boundaries weren't clear, and you were stepping into a role that didn't quite have a roadmap. What was it like to take that on, navigating uncertainty, shifting power dynamics, I imagine, and the responsibility for setting precedent?
Virginia's system of cabinet officers was sort of superimposed on, let's call it 50 state agencies. And there was a layer of cabinet officers which were put in place in the early 1970s. But they did not have any line authority. They were on the cabinet officer was on the staff of the governor in a sense. Yes, you had kind of overall policy responsibility for your agencies, but you didn't run them. So in the case of the Secretary of Transportation had under its secretariat the Virginia Department of Transportation, which had a commissioner. The commissioner was the decision maker. The secretary was not. The secretary had the authority that a governor would have, but the actual decision to build a road or not, or design it this way or that way, or locate it here or there, was made by a board appointed over multi-year terms by governors, plural, and chaired by the commissioner of transportation, not the secretary. Secretary didn't even participate in the meetings. So the decision making was made over here, if you will, and the secretary was over here. And when I was first approached about the job, I said, why would I want to do that? And the then governor-elect and later governor, Doug Wilder, agreed to submit legislation, because others had recommended those changes, submit legislation that would make the secretary the chairman of that board and really give you the kind of authority that you need to say, yes, we're going to build this highway or fund this transit project, and it's going to be located here, not there, and makes all the difference in the world. So I spent most of my secretariat time thinking about and pushing for decisions on that board, which prior secretaries had never even been a member of. Everybody in Northern Virginia bellyached about the terrible transportation system, and rightly so. And we were listed in all the national listings as having either the first or the second worst transportation network in the country. Maybe Los Angeles beat us out, or maybe they didn't in a given year. So my job was to try to do what could be done to affect that.
And the scope of that included what exactly?
Roads. And one of the things that I recommended, the governor agreed, and the legislature approved, was creating in a separate department of rail and public transportation, Previously, it had been buried around the third level of the highway department, and you can imagine how much attention that got. Uh, but creating a Department of Rail and Public Transportation as an equal department to the traditional highway department was one of the things that Doug Wilder succeeded in getting during his term of office. And Virginia, as you may recall, is that funny place where a governor can't succeed himself. You only get one term in Virginia. We're the only state that's that way. So whatever you're going to do, you got to do quickly.
John, the impression that I just got from our conversation here is that you were appointed to the role of Secretary of Transportation for the state because of your intimate knowledge of the transportation issues in Northern Virginia, but your responsibilities were statewide, right?
Right. I guess to a certain extent, I brought one other asset, and that was I had traveled extensively around the state over the years in support of and often traveling with candidates for statewide office. I'd had starting back in my college years, I had traveled around the state, and there weren't many places in Virginia that I had not been. And I knew a lot of people around the state from state politics. So if you were a legislator from Danville, or if you were Edgar Bacon from far Southwest Virginia, probably I knew you and I knew a little bit about your area, but I knew enough to ask you about your area. And during my 4 years, I continued that travel. Of the 135 jurisdictions in Virginia, there's not one that I've not been in, at least once.
John, you worked across jurisdictions and with regional groups, the Metro York Transportation Planning Boards, and others. And as I've been interviewing people around Northern Virginia because of the RELI sponsorship of this series, I have heard so many stories where the collaboration at different governmental jurisdictions has just worked. And I kind of ask everyone the same question. Does it work because it's just built into the DNA of the region, the economic integration of everything? Or are there skills that have been developed and attitudes that have happened, or leaders who have arose who've just made that collaboration distinct and make it effective for the community?
Good question. I think first, the Washington metropolitan area is an economic unit. It's understood that in order for Arlington to thrive, DC must thrive. And DC relies on Arlington and the Montgomery and Prince George counties in Maryland as a part of a growing, thriving metropolitan area. So, yeah, there's a natural economic independence or dependence, interdependence among the jurisdictions in the Washington area. And because of that, there exists a variety of regional organizations. So no elected official in the Washington area escapes participating in some interjurisdictional group. You can't serve, whether it's Arlington or Montgomery County or the District of Columbia, you can't serve in this area at the local level without participating in one or more regional groups with individuals from the other jurisdictions. So out of that sort of natural bed of interconnectedness grows friendships, understanding, knowledge of the politics of the other jurisdictions. And from that, collaboration comes much more easily. I'll give you an example, very tangible example. It was during my service on the Metro board, on the WMATA board, and I happened to be chairman that particular year. Chairmanship rotates. The issue was capital funding, the money for building sections of the Metro Rail. there was a finite amount of money that Congress had approved. The overall system cost more than that finite amount of money. The job before the Metro Board was to decide which parts of the system were going to get the guaranteed funding that we knew was there, and which parts of it would still be on a map, but as a dotted line where the funding in the future maybe or maybe not. A kind of difficult set of decisions for jurisdictions.
It doesn't get harder than deciding who gets served first.
Who gets the known money and who has to bet and wish for the future.
Okay.
So, we debated this internally and informally among the 6 voting members of the Metro Board. And the bylaws of the Metro Board say you've got to have 4 votes, but at least one of those votes has to come from each of the 3 jurisdictions, major jurisdictions, Virginia, D.C., Maryland. So we got down to a couple of final issues as I'm shuttling back and forth among the jurisdictions and the individuals involved. And it came to late August and early September, and people were tired of talking about this, but we had no resolution. And so I invited the 6 members of the board to come to my house. And these were in the days when Metro didn't have a FOIA rules. So we met privately, and just happened to be my birthday. So at the key point when people were still at loggerheads, I said, come on, people, this is my birthday. I got to get this decided this afternoon so we can get out of here, get it done. My wife and family are planning an event. So, come on, let's get together here. And, it gave them gave them an excuse in a personal sense, and helped galvanize the group to come to a final decision, which it did in a unanimous vote later in the week to decide what monies were going to be spent where.
The famous line from Tip O'Neill is that all politics is local, but it sounds like if you were writing your own political lesson book, that this one might be politics is personal, and you have to work with the people with whom you have to fashion agreement, and you use all the skills you have, including the fact that it's your birthday, to get that agreement.
Yes, shaming people into making a final decision is certainly not beneath me. But these were people that they wanted to come to an answer, and were finally able to do so.
I'm going to move us on. I have something else I need to ask you about. I understand that you teach a course on 20th century Virginia history and politics. And I want to ask you, looking through that lens, is there a particular story or a moment that you find especially instructive and inspiring, something that feels relevant to the situation that we're in today, an environment of political division and polarization? What do you think about through your historical lens?
Wow, that's a difficult question. I would say the most tumultuous and difficult time, and the course I teach is basically 20th century Virginia politics and history, but it's really from World War II or shortly before World War II up to today. And the toughest time in Virginia politics and history during that period was in the wake of the Supreme Court decision in Brown v. Board of Education to desegregate the schools, which Virginia resisted very strongly and coined its then political leader, Harry Byrd Sr., coined the term massive resistance. And massive resistance included closing of the schools in a number of jurisdictions in Virginia rather than integrating them between the races. That was the late 1950s. That issue decided on what side you sat for the next 20 years. You were either in favor of closing of the schools and keeping the races separate, or you were in favor of the public school system. That divide affected an entire generation, mine, and the generation that preceded it, and the generation that followed it, because it still was the seminal issue in Virginia politics up until, I'd say, the early early to mid 80s. So it dominated Virginia politics for 25, 30 years.
The lesson from that is when you're in politics, you have to be aware that there are some decisions that are, use the word seminal. There are some things where history is going to judge you, and your decision in that moment is going to matter for a very long time.
That's one lesson. The other lesson, which I learned from my mentor, Joe Fisher, was a lot of political issues are at their root moral issues. And you need to sort through in your head what you think is the right, morally right, correct thing to do, and try to do that. In the era of massive resistance, there were a number of pretty heroic people who made what they considered to be the moral choice, even though it cost them their political office.
So I have to ask, are we in one of those moral moments right now?
I'm not sure I would consider what's going on in Washington. There certainly are horrendous personal repercussion and implications of a lot of the decisions being made. I don't think there's an overriding moral issue, although I would think that a decision to cut off certain programs from categories of people certainly bottoms out as a moral issue. Treatment of immigrants is certainly a moral issue. But that's not unique. As much as terrible as this administration may be in the eyes of many of us, that's not unique to this administration. Those kinds of moral quandary issues arise in every administration.
John, you've spent literally a lifetime in public service, and you continue to teach and write and mentor others. What keeps you engaged?
It's fun. I enjoy it. I enjoy the people. I'm galvanized by the substance, by the issues. Yeah, I mean, I enjoy it. Am I as active today as I was when I was 50 or 60 or 70? No, but I still try to be pretty active.
And so for those who in this moment are feeling discouraged or disillusioned or just exhausted, what words of encouragement or realism would you offer for them?
Well, I guess I'd say two things. One, don't just sit there. Do something, whether it's raising your voice or your placard. That's one way of doing it. But another way of doing it is going to the local food shelter or homeless shelter or free clinic and volunteering, spending time helping those who will be most affected by what's going on. One thing to complain about it, which we all do, but you really ought to be out there in an affirmative way doing something about it. So that's what I would say. And then, although this is hard to convince people, this too will pass. my heart goes out to the people who are affected now by what's going on and whose lives are being turned upside down. But in the longer term, for the culture, for the society, this will run its course. Not sure I can be quite as optimistic about what's going on internationally, but we've seen these kinds of dreadful things before, and maybe nothing quite as sharp as we're seeing now. But certainly the Nixon years and before that, the Depression years were terrible. And the democracy survived. I hope this one will too.
John Milliken, thank you so much for being open to this conversation. It's been wonderful visiting with you. I'm very grateful.
Well, I enjoyed it a lot. I enjoyed talking with you. Thank you.
Again, thank you to my guest, John Milliken, whose decades of leadership in Virginia across local, regional, and state government continue to offer wisdom for those committed to public service. And thank you again to RELI, the Regional Elected Leaders Initiative at the Schar School of Policy and Government at George Mason University, for their sponsorship of this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review it on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Your feedback helps others discover the show. And don't forget to follow or subscribe so you never miss an episode. This episode was edited by Nick Living the Dream Tantillo. Our executive producer is John Little. I'm Matt Lehrman of Social Prosperity Partners. If you have a question or a comment about today's topic, I'd love to hear from you. Reach me at 602-688-2724 or Matt, M-A-T-T, at socialprosperity.us. Do you have a story of lessons learned on your journey to leadership? Click the podcast guest link in the program notes. I'm always looking for instructive and inspiring voices to feature on the show. Upon reflection, John Milliken's story is a powerful reminder that leadership isn't defined by a single title or moment. It's shaped over time through challenges faced, relationships built, and the persistence to serve with integrity even when the path is uncertain. His journey shows the enduring value of experience, of thoughtful governance, and a steady commitment to the principles that earn public trust, especially in times of change. Wherever you are in your leadership journey, his story reminds us that public service is a calling. And if you're willing to lead with clarity and purpose and heart, your community will be stronger for it. Thanks for listening. We'll be back soon with another Community Catalyst.